All right. So I'm here with James Wilson, the research director at Orchestra, the Basque Institute of Competitiveness. And James, you've been working with studying cluster initiatives and drivers of regional competitiveness and territorial systems for a long, long time. And I'm here to ask you, we're talking about a bit the role of cities and driving innovation. My first question to you is a little bit conceptual things. How would you describe, or what are similarities and differences between the concept of a cluster initiative, industry-driven collaborative initiatives, and these kind of city-led collaborative initiatives, innovation districts, or other types of city-led?
Good morning, Emily. For me, I think the difference, there are lots of similarities, first of all, and the main similarity is that they are rooted in what you might say the power of collaboration, the idea that collaborative dynamics across different actors generates enhanced creativity, innovation, productivity, and better socioeconomic results for everybody involved. So that's if you like, the similarity in that sense is bigger than the difference. So that for me is the similarity that's core to both cluster initiatives and then city-led innovation districts or whatever. I think that the differences, and again we get into kind of, often with these things the conceptual differences are important for some people and not so important for other people, and it depends on what you're using the concepts for more than anything. But to me, the two real differences are, firstly, slightly to do with the scale of geography, and secondly, slightly to do with the type of activity. So for me, innovation districts are a bit broader in terms of the type of activity. They're not specific to one sector or group of sectors. They tend to be more open and broad in terms of trying to foster innovation across a broad range of activities. Whereas cluster initiatives are usually more specific. So they might be focused on aerospace or ICT or tourism, or a more specific set of activities, not necessarily a sector, because again cluster initiatives cross sectors and yes, should cross sectors, but they're more tightly knitted around a concrete activity than an innovation district or a city-led initiative. And then the second main difference, I guess, is the geographical scale. When we're talking city-level innovation districts, we're often talking about a very confined geographic scale. So maybe you're talking about a district of a city where you're trying to encourage those dynamics of innovation. So very close, walking distance from one place to another, etc. When we talk about cluster initiatives, usually we're talking more on the regional scale. So maybe instead of walking distance, we're talking driving distance between companies in a place. So I think there's also a slightly different geographical scale. So those are kind of subtle differences, but as I said at the beginning, I think the main similarity that drives through them all is this power of collaboration, and the idea that they're about different actors identifying common challenges, common issues, and working on them collaboratively. And that what brings them together is more important than what's
different. And what do you think the role of cities is or could be in fostering and leading collaborative innovation processes and driving transformation in their geography? What role can they play?
I think that cities are critically important for innovation and creativity, and history has shown that. The most creative, innovative places have been built around cities, because naturally cities are where people come together and you have a critical mass of people. So I think if we're talking about cities and municipalities and city administrations, there are a number of key roles that they can play, ranging from kind of the more broad-based to actually much more specific things. In a broad sense, I think perhaps the best thing that cities can do to encourage creativity, innovation, etc., is to provide a living environment where creative, talented people want to live, because that's ultimately what brings people to cities, what keeps them there, and it's the basis for that collaborative behaviour is the people. So I think that perhaps the most important function of cities is to work well, to create a city that functions well, that actually connects bits together, that provides an environment which people want to live, and that therefore is a magnet for what often is called talent attraction of some form, or talent retention. So you create that conducive environment. I also think that moving more towards business-led innovation and what role they can play to help firms who are innovating. I think again, their cities have a really interesting role to play as test beds for many of the innovation activities. Particularly when we're talking now about a lot of innovation focused on sustainability, movement towards the green economy, digital economy, quite radical changes in how we do things. You need systems to work well when you're innovating in terms of moving towards, for example, a circular economy approach. And systems, a city is a system. So cities are great test beds to be able to test, for example, electricity grids, intelligent electricity grids, or intelligent transport mobility solutions, the types of things where firms are looking to innovate, that it's difficult for a firm on its own to do that, but with a city context, it can actually test a lot of its solutions.
Yeah.
So kind of forward-looking cities, I think, can engage with firms in quite a proactive way in terms of really trying to drive forward the innovation that needs that systemic context. And then I guess more practically and specifically, what can they do? Well, often I think they play a very important role in fostering entrepreneurship. That means kind of providing the space often, physical space, building space, incubator facilities and these types of things, so that entrepreneurs feel that they have a place to do their stuff within the city. So I think, going from a scale of very broad things down to very specific things, those are kind of three areas that I would perhaps emphasize in terms of the role that cities play.
It's really encouraging to hear these examples, because this is kind of general examples of what cities can do, and referring back to what Lund is doing, they seem to tick all the boxes. So that's really interesting. This interview series is about the new normal, post-COVID-19 shutdowns and different ways of collaborating that we are kind of experimenting with now, and finding ourselves needing to develop new ways to collaborate, new ways to foster innovation, new ways to create places for entrepreneurs to belong and build that system that functions. How do you see the role of cities in driving innovation and these kind of transformational changes towards climate, addressing climate change and open data, things like this? How do you see the role of cities changing given the COVID context?
I think that's the most difficult question, I think, because we're looking into a kind of a void of uncertainty. But I think that
crystal ball, just take a look.
It goes a little bit back to the point I made on test beds and systems, and how I think for many of the solutions that we're grappling with particularly with regards to the digital revolution and the climate emergency, these are challenges that were there before COVID. And cities, I think, in many places were playing that systemic role, trying to encourage innovations, but they needed to drive that forward, to up the pace of that. I think that what we see with COVID, on the one hand, is an acceleration of some of those trends. I think we're certainly the digitalization trend we're seeing accelerated. Also, I think that we will need to accelerate our response to the climate emergency. So I think that we're in a period now where all actors, from national governments to regional governments to city level governments, need to be doing more radical things and needing to be really testing and pushing the limits of what they can do to provide an environment to test new ways of doing things that are more sustainable, essentially. COVID complicates that slightly, I think, or perhaps more than slightly. Because again, the big advantage of cities over history has historically been the bringing together of people in close proximity. And what we have with a pandemic is that bringing together people in close proximity is the worst thing that you can do for a pandemic. And we've seen, the biggest, most densely populated cities around the world, places like New York, have been hardest hit by the COVID pandemic. But cities are very resilient places, again, historically. And I don't think that some people have talked, I've read articles talking about the death of the city and this type of thing in response to COVID. I think cities will find solutions. Already, I mean, I live in a small city here in Spain, and we're starting to open up, starting to go back to normal life. And people are going into work, going about their normal life in ways that has interaction, but they're doing it in different ways. You know, using masks, having social distance, etc. That's already a form of adaptation, and I think that the creativity that comes from proximity of people will ultimately still absolutely critical for meeting the bigger challenges that we have in society, such as the climate emergency. And so we will find solutions in cities to adapt and change slightly our behaviour until we can overcome this pandemic and move on from it.
So the roles are the same, but the ways to implement those roles may be different.
Yeah. They may need adaptation certainly in the short and medium term. We've already seen a radical adaptation in the short term. I mean, we've already seen cities changing radically in the last 3 months around how they operate. And now they're trying to work on a solution, you might call it living with COVID, because it's not something that's going to go away quickly. So cities have to find a medium-term solution. And I think we're probably seeing around the world lots of experimentation with that, different cities trying different things to try and maintain the advantages that come from living in a city, whilst mitigating the risks and dangers that brings in terms of the closeness of contact, etc.